Mhm.
I am really, really bad at being sick. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I think some of you might understand because the thing is, I'm really bad at resting, at pausing and taking a break. I get bored. Even with a good book or good podcast or whatever, after a day or two at the most, I'm just done with rest. James has to force me to sit down, no less lay down and rest. My mind, even if it's all foggy from the illness, just runs over all the things that I think I should be doing right now. I feel bad not being able to take care of the kids and all their endless wants and needs. And I feel bad hiding in my room from them so that I don't have to get up every few minutes. I try to tell myself that if I just rest now, I will feel better faster. But after I've rested for a bit, I start to underestimate just how sick I am. And I think, I feel okay laying here. So why don't I just get up and do stuff? And then 20 minutes later, I regret it because I feel miserable all over again. I am so bad at resting, so bad at doing nothing. I think in part this stems from capitalism. Because capitalism is more than just our economic structure, it's a part of our culture. It's a part of the very air that we breathe. We have taken it into ourselves, taken on its values and its judgments. It tells us about our worth, and it links our worth to our productivity, telling us our value lies in what we do. This lie runs so counter to the heart of our faith. The truth that God tells us that we are worthy, that we have value and importance in God's eyes, that we are enough, simply because of who and whose we are, beloved children of God made in the divine image. Nothing can change that truth. Nothing we do and nothing we have done can change our worth to God. We are loved. Sometimes, probably way more often than we would care to admit, these lies of capitalism creep into the church and creep into the gospel. These lies, after all, are a part of us. Dale Ryan is a professor at Fuller Seminary. He once said, I had this recurring nightmare that you could take all the sermons preached in America on any given Sunday and put them in a big pot and boil them all down and look at the sort of bottom line in the bottom of this vat. And it would say, try harder. We have reduced the gospel to trying harder. That is a real gut punch. Have we in America reduced the gospel to try harder? Have we allowed the values of capitalism to inform our faith so that our faith demands productivity, that God demands productivity? Do we believe that we must earn God's love and grace, that we are not inherently worthy? I love the words of the prophet Isaiah in our reading today. They speak to me. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. Most of us are beyond weary of this pandemic, exhausted by the distance, by staying home, by the never-ending precautions and the fearful news. The current demands of life are, for many, are overwhelming and unsustainable. And yet, there are no good choices or better choices to be made. No option except to just keep surviving day by day, however lonely or painful or anxiety filled each day is. Into our weariness, Isaiah invites hope. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Is his refrain. Isaiah poetically praises God and God's power. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Even if we have known and have heard, we may not know the truth deeply enough. We may not hear the truth often enough to counter the relentless demands of productivity. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. God will renew us. God will give us the strength we need for today. God, in particular, calls and works through those who find their own strength lacking. In my ongoing attempt to dwell a little more in the Bible's poetry, I pondered an odd metaphor in the beginning of this passage, that the inhabitants of the earth are like grasshoppers to God who sits above the circle of the earth and stretches out the heavens like a curtain. I was grateful to read the words of Nicola Torbett, who affirmed my reading of the text and then offered something way more insightful than my own reading. She wrote that it's easy to read about people being like grasshoppers and hear that God is so big that God might just squash us like the measly little bugs that we are. I don't know about you, but that's how I read it. She goes on, though, because the very next metaphor is about princes and rulers who are like plants. Those in power are like wisps of grass, she says. God easily overpowers them. Now, this is not to say just that God can squish bugs and destroy flimsy plants. Torbett praises the beauty and uniqueness of the grasshopper and notes their destructive power. Those in power, those sprouts of plants, are not stronger than God's creatures, the grasshoppers who eat the grass. Those in power in Isaiah are the destructive rulers of the Babylonian Empire. God acts through the inspiration of God's people, and here those people are weary and exhausted, entirely reliant on God's strength. But they can overcome injustice and topple empires. My own strength and ability are far less important than God's, which is a very remarkable grace. Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. There is no need to try harder. Just root and ground ourselves in God, our source of being. The Gospel of Mark offers us a story this week about the power of God renewing God's people. In line with the style of this gospel, the story is brief and to the point. Simon's mother-in-law was sick. The disciples tell Jesus, he heals her, and she begins to serve them. In its brevity, I will admit that I get a bit bristly about this story. It's that ending. She serves them. The gender roles seem on full display. That the woman must immediately be cooking and cleaning for the men who've come to her house. It can so easily read like, if you aren't sick and in bed, the woman must be in the kitchen serving the men. But I made a great discovery this week. The Greek word in this verse for serve is the verb diakoneo. This should sound familiar to you because we've just installed our diaconate, which gets its name from this Greek word. Simon's mother-in-law acts as a deacon. She ministers to them. It's the same word from the verse in Matthew, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. She is restored to her vocation and her calling, to ministry. She is able to do this ministry not through her own power and strength, but through God's renewing. Through God giving power to the faint and strength to the powerless. Her productivity is not the measure of her worth, though. She is deserving of God's love and grace at every point in this story, whether she is sick and in bed or ministering to Jesus himself. Through her healing and her service, Jesus' ministry in this town reaches far and wide. Through her hospitality, her home becomes a center of healing and restoration. Reading this, that the whole city was gathered around the door, don't you just think of all those vaccination sites? I haven't been in person, but we see them all over in the news. Lots of cars all in a line. The gymnasiums, the super pods, places where thousands of people are converging to receive the miraculous gift of science and health. Simon's mother-in-law, renewed and enlivened by God from sickness and weariness, serves God so that through Jesus, many others may also be renewed and enlivened by God as well, restored to their vocation. Then Jesus models the thing that I am so bad at: rest, renewal, Sabbath. He goes out to pray. Jesus knows it's not all about productivity. Jesus pauses to connect to his source, to God. Jesus, who is one with God, still rests in God's presence. Jesus prays and listens for God still speaking. I'm willing to bet that Jesus felt the tyranny of the urgent, the demands of all those who still sought his healing and restoration, who wanted to hear his good news. Jesus, after all, in all his holiness, was also human. I wonder if he ever got bored in his moments of solitude, if he ever listened for God and heard nothing, if he ever cried out for God and felt lonely. Perhaps he, like us, had moments where he was uncertain where God was calling him, and moments when he was weary of the demands people made of him, weary of the pain he encountered, weary even of his call. Yet, while Jesus' ministry is a brief whirlwind of travel, teaching, healing, feeding, connecting, seeing, and loving, the gospel writers all remind us that Jesus continually roots and grounds himself in God in these quiet moments of solitary prayer. And Jesus accepts the hospitality and love and care of those he encounters, like Simon's mother-in-law, who serves him. Even Jesus doesn't do it all on his own. He draws his strength from God and from God's people. He does as much as he can, and then he moves on. Even Jesus, who redeems the whole world, does not save, heal, and restore every person in every place and meet every demand he encounters. He was one person, and he could not in that lifetime do everything everyone wanted from him. God knows our weariness and our limitations, and God still loves us. God doesn't call us to do everything, and God doesn't call us to do anything alone. God is not measuring our worth or judging our limitations. So find rest, beloveds of God, in the grace that you are enough, just as you are. Perhaps we need only be who God made us to be, like grasshoppers eating grass. Or maybe we're simply tired people eating ice cream. Somehow, though, through God's strength, not ours, human kingdoms can topple like wisps of grass in the wind, and God will renew those without strength of their own. May each breath you take fill you with God's very breath, God's Spirit, and give you strength for one more day. Amen.